It was the middle of July when we made the climb. Me and two buddies, just chasing that strange mix of silence and adrenaline you only find in places people don't usually go. The trail up had been brutal, barely even a trail after a while. There were no markers, no other hikers, nothing but endless gray rock and small patches of stubborn mountain grass. We were high up, higher than I'd ever camped before. Our legs burned all day, and the air got thinner with every step. But we had one thing pushing us, that glacier. That giant wall of blue ice sitting at the top of the ridge, like a frozen ocean frozen in mid-crash. When we reached it, it didn't even feel real. The thing was massive, stretching like a frozen cliff along the backside of the mountain bowl we'd come up through. The air was quiet, dead quiet, like the mountain was holding its breath. We set up camp a few hundred feet from it, just far enough away that we could still feel the cold air bleeding off it, but not close enough to get hit with any sudden wind bursts. It was strange how much colder it felt just being near it, like standing in front of a freezer with the door wide open. We'd brought a basic 3-person tent, compact and easy to carry, and we used the surrounding rocks to build a small half wall around it to block some of the air. It wasn't much, maybe 2 feet high, but it made a difference. We cooked near the edge of our little wall, the stove flame flickering in the wind even with a windscreen around it. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I remember how the only real sound came from the occasional creaking or cracking from the glacier itself. The sound would echo strangely through the bowl, low and deep, like the mountain shifting in its sleep. That evening, we sat on our foam pads and watched a pair of mountaineers start their climb up the glacier. Tiny figures against the towering blue wall, tied together with a rope and moving in small, careful steps. It looked slow, cold, and dangerous, but beautiful. The kind of thing you know you'll never do but feel lucky just to witness. As the sun set, the glacier glowed faintly blue. It was the kind of view that burned into your memory, the kind you think about when you're stuck behind a desk or lying in bed unable to sleep. We slept hard that night, wrapped tight in our bags, the cold creeping in despite all our layers. The wind stayed low, and aside from a few distant pops from the ice, it was a still night. Morning came with bright sun, clear skies, and the sound of runoff, meltwater trickling down into little temporary streams all around us. You could hear it beneath the rocks, beneath the ice. It sounded alive. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and whatever was left of our instant coffee, we packed a small day bag and headed off to check out a waterfall we'd seen from the ridge on our way up. It wasn't marked on any map we had, just a silver line in the distance that we figured was worth checking out. The walk wasn't far, maybe an hour or so over uneven rock and across some light snow patches that hadn't melted yet. The air was crisp and dry, and the sun made it feel warmer than it really was. The waterfall was better than we'd hoped, pouring out of the side of the cliff and splashing down into a series of bright, cold pools. It looked untouched, clean, untouched by humans. We sat there for a while, shoes off, soaking our feet and letting the cold water numb the aches. We took a few photos, just the kind you take without thinking too much about, assuming they'll never do the place justice anyway. We stayed out there for a few hours, lost in that strange high-altitude calm. No reception, no noises beyond what nature decided to give us, and nothing in the world to worry about. When we headed back, the sun had shifted westward and shadows had started stretching across the rocks. Felt a little cooler, but nothing alarming. We talked about heating up some soup, maybe staying another night before heading back down. We hadn't seen a single soul besides the 2 climbers since we got up there. But when we crested the last rise back into our camp bowl, something was wrong. The rocks looked out of place, scattered. Our tent wasn't there. At first, it didn't register. We just stood there, staring down, trying to make sense of it. Then it hit. Our tent was gone. Not collapsed, not dragged by the wind. Gone. In its place was a mess of rocks, torn fabric, and what looked like a mini landslide. Huge chunks of ice sat where our tent had been, surrounded by smaller bits of broken glacier and sharp, angular stones. One of our foam pads was shredded and half buried under gravel. Our stove, that heavy steel stove, was bent and partially buried. One of our backpacks was wedged in between 2 boulders like a toy. We didn't speak. We just stood there and stared. It didn't take long to figure out what happened. A piece of the glacier, a massive one, probably the size of a small car or bigger, had broken off and tumbled down. It must have hit loose rock and triggered a mini slide, dragging everything in its path. Our tent was right in the way. Everything we had was there, or what was left of it. Our sleeping bags were torn open, covered in dirt and ice. Our food bag had been flattened completely. One of the tent poles had pierced straight into the ground like a spear. We walked around, slowly checking the damage. I remember my hands were shaking, not from the cold, not entirely. Just the realization that if we hadn't gone to see that waterfall, if we'd stayed to rest or nap or even been running a bit behind, we would have been right there when it hit. No question. It wasn't just rocks. That ice had weight and speed and force. It wouldn't have been a question of injuries. It would have been instant. We'd be buried under 30 tons of ice and stone, and no one would have known for days, maybe weeks. No one knew we were up here. We didn't have time to panic. We had to act. We dug out what we could, salvaged one pack with the emergency radio and enough supplies to hike back down. The other gear was either crushed or buried. We didn't even try to sleep there again. We made a decision in less than 5 minutes. Grab what you can and move. Get down. Now, the descent was brutal. We had to move fast but careful, with tired legs and heavy minds. Every sound from the glacier behind us made us flinch. Every gust of wind felt like another warning. We camped far lower that night, in a sheltered forest clearing, barely able to eat or talk. I remember lying awake, not from fear anymore, but from realization. That thin, sharp line between being alive and not. We had crossed it without even knowing. We made it out the next day, limping and dirty but whole. When we reached the base trailhead, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. I still think about that day, about how close it was. People talk about near-death experiences like dramatic movie scenes, but this wasn't like that. It was quiet, cold, slow. It didn't even look dangerous until after it had already passed. Nature doesn't warn you, it just happens. We never went back to that glacier. I don't think we ever will. It was the middle of summer, a few years back, and me and 3 of my closest mates decided we'd do a bit of wild camping. Nothing fancy, just a cheap tent, some sleeping bags, a cooler full of cheap food and warm drinks, and a big open field somewhere in the countryside of England. I can't even remember the name of the place we camped exactly, just that it was quiet, way out from town, and surrounded by waist-high grass with a line of trees way off in the distance. The sort of place where no one would bother you, and you could stay up late, drink, talk rubbish, and not worry about anything or anyone. We got there in the late afternoon, after stopping by a petrol station to grab snacks and drinks. We parked just off the side of a narrow country road, carried our stuff through the field, and found a fairly flat bit of ground to pitch the tent. Took a while to set it up. None of us were exactly outdoorsmen. Poles kept bending, and no one read the instructions. But after about an hour of shouting and swearing, we got it up. It was a big dome-style tent, cheap and cheerful, just enough room for the 4 of us if we lay side by side. No real space to move around inside, but we didn't plan on doing much except sleeping in there. That night was normal. We sat around on our folding chairs, passed around a speaker playing old rock songs, shared a few beers, told stories, laughed, and just enjoyed being out in the open. The air had that warm, dry smell of grass and dirt, and there were no streetlights, no cars, no background noise at all. Just wind rustling through the grass and the occasional distant sound of some bird or animal out in the woods. It felt peaceful, like one of those memories you think back on years later with a smile. Eventually, the temperature dropped a bit and we started getting tired. We zipped up the tent, got into our sleeping bags, and lay there talking quietly for a bit. Like idiots, we were telling each other scary stories. You know, the sort: ghosts, haunted houses, murderers in the woods. I remember at one point, one of the lads mentioned a story about an old headless farmer or something. Some dumb thing he claimed to have read online. We all laughed it off, of course. We were grown men, or at least we thought we were. But still, you know how it is. When you're lying in the dark with nothing but a thin layer of fabric between you and the world, everything feels a bit more intense. We must have drifted off sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning. I was just getting into a light sleep, half awake, half out of it, when I heard one of my friends, James, let out a sharp, panicked scream, not like a startled yelp. I mean a full-on scream, like the kind that makes your whole body go tense instantly. I sat bolt upright, heart hammering, sleep completely gone. The other 2 shot up too, all of us disoriented, squinting in the dark, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. James was sitting up in his sleeping bag, wide-eyed, breathing hard, sweat running down his forehead even though it was cool. He kept pointing to the back corner of the tent and muttering, "There was a head, just a head, floating." None of us knew what to say. We were too confused, too freaked out by how genuinely terrified he looked. He wasn't messing about. He wasn't laughing. His voice was shaking. You could see the whites of his eyes, darting around the dark tent like he was expecting something to jump at him. He said the head was just there, in the corner, not attached to a body. Just a man's head, hanging in the air about a foot or so off the ground, like it was lying on an invisible pillow. He said the face was looking straight at him, eyes open and wide, mouth moving as if it was speaking, but no sound, just moving lips. We all looked. Nothing was there. Just our bags, a couple of shoes, someone's water bottle. The tent was dead silent, but that didn't matter. Once someone plants an image like that in your head, it sticks. I couldn't stop picturing it. The shape, the expression, the mouth moving without sound. And the more I thought about it, the less I could convince myself it was just a dream or a trick of the light. James was shaking. We had to calm him down. But truth is, none of us were okay after that. No one wanted to lie back down. No one wanted to turn off the torch. We just sat there, in that cramped little tent, backs against the fabric, knees pulled up to our chests, staring at that empty corner like it was going to sprout something awful. The air inside started feeling hotter, like we'd all been holding our breath for too long. Outside, the field was dead quiet. Not even the wind moved anymore. No insects, no birds, nothing. Just this awful stillness pressing in from all sides. No one spoke. For hours. I remember checking my phone at one point, 4:17 a.m. Felt like time had frozen. All of us were waiting for something, some noise, some movement. But nothing happened. Not a thing. As soon as the sky started to lighten, just the faintest hint of blue over the tops of the trees, we were up. No one said a word. We didn't even pack properly. We just shoved everything into bags, collapsed the tent in a rush without folding it, and carried it all back to the car like we were being chased. I remember looking back at the field one last time just to check, I guess. There was nothing, just grass, a few broken beer bottles, our flattened patch of ground. We drove home in silence. The radio was off. Everyone looked tired and pale. No one talked about it for a long time. Later, weeks later, we tried to explain it away. Maybe James was half asleep and hallucinated it. Maybe a shadow played tricks on his eyes. Maybe it was the mix of alcohol, tiredness, and ghost stories. But even saying all that, none of us really believed it. Because it wasn't just what he saw, it was how real his fear was. How it affected all of us. We never went camping together again. Not once. That was the last trip. And we definitely never told ghost stories around the tent after that. This happened about 7 years ago, back when I was in my final summer as a camper at my overnight camp in New England. I'd been going to this camp for years, and by then, I knew every trail, every cabin, every tradition. That year felt like a big deal. Me and the other returning last-year campers all wanted to make the most of it. You kind of feel invincible at that age, 16, 17, old enough to think you know everything, still young enough to be completely stupid. Part of our camp's routine was the overnight. Basically, each cabin got sent off to a separate site somewhere on camp property for a night under the stars. It was supposed to be one of those experiences where you learn how to build a fire, cook your own dinner, tell some scary stories, bond, and then hike back in the morning. That year, our overnight was set up as a joint trip with another cabin, all guys our age. The site was about 2.5 miles away, at the top of a massive hill. We used to call it Bald Top because the summit was just flat rock, open to the sky, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. From up there, you could see treetops stretching all the way to the other side of the lake. It was beautiful, yeah, but also a little eerie, especially as it got dark. There was nothing up there. No cell signal, no buildings, no lights. Just us, our tents, a fire pit, and woods in every direction. That summer, our whole age group had been fixated on this idea of townies. These were the people who lived in the small towns that bordered the camp's property. The camp actually owned a huge chunk of land around the lake, so we never really saw anyone from outside. But it was kind of this creepy half-joke that we had. What if some weird townies came sneaking into camp one night? What if they watched us from the woods? Broke into a cabin? We knew it was dumb, but that didn't stop us from talking about it. Some of the younger counselors played along with it too, especially after dark, which probably didn't help. The hike up to Bald Top wasn't bad, just long. We carried our sleeping bags, tents, food, and whatever else we needed in big packs, and got there around late afternoon. We set up just before sunset. The counselors helped us start a fire, and we cooked some hot dogs and foil packs with potatoes and onions and stuff. Everyone was in a good mood. We told a few stories, talked about how this was our last overnight as campers, and watched the stars come out. The whole hilltop got really quiet after dark. You could hear the crackle of the fire, the buzzing of insects, and not much else. Sometime after we'd started to get into our tents, a few guys said they were hearing things. Not just animal noises, but actual footsteps or voices in the trees. I didn't hear anything myself, but once one or two people say they heard something, suddenly everyone's on edge. A couple kids came out of their tents saying they thought someone was out there. Some said they saw shadows moving behind the tree line. It wasn't panic exactly, but there was a definite sense of something not being right. The counselors tried to calm us down. They said it was just animals or the wind. They told us the usual stuff. This is private property. No one ever comes out here. We're totally safe. But it didn't work. Too many kids were scared. So two of the counselors, Joe and Thomas, volunteered to go check it out. Joe was this big guy, tall, really athletic, looked like he could probably bench press a small tree. Thomas was more average looking, but he was calm and responsible. Everyone liked him. They told us they were going to walk a short perimeter through the trees, just to be sure there was nothing going on. They took one of the walkie-talkies and disappeared into the woods. The rest of us sat around the dying fire, trying to act like we weren't all staring at the trees, listening for something. It was quiet for a while, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Then we heard it. It started with Joe's voice, loud and angry, cutting through the trees. He wasn't yelling exactly, but he was speaking forcefully, like he was confronting someone. He was saying things like, "You can't be here. This is private property. We have a walkie. If you don't leave, we're calling the police." The second I heard that, my stomach dropped. It didn't sound like a joke. And this wasn't a story anymore. Everyone froze. Then came this loud bang, like something heavy hitting something else. Right after that, there was this scream, high-pitched, sharp, like someone had been seriously hurt. It didn't sound fake. It sounded like panic. Then Joe came sprinting out of the trees, face pale and wild-eyed. He pointed back toward the woods and yelled something like, "Get the kids out of here now," and turned back around, vanishing into the trees again. Total chaos broke out. One of the other counselors grabbed a couple of steak knives we'd used for cooking and ran in after him. The rest of us? We just ran. Most of us weren't even dressed properly. Some kids were barefoot. A lot of us were just in boxers or shorts. We were tearing down that rocky hill in the dark, half blind, tripping over roots, scraping legs on branches. Kids were crying. I remember one guy behind me kept muttering prayers under his breath. A few tried to grab sticks or rocks, like they were going to fight off someone in the woods. I was just focused on not falling and trying to stay with the group. I remember how sharp the air felt on my chest, how the cold sweat stuck to my back. I remember the way my heart was beating so fast I thought I might actually throw up. My legs were shaking as I ran, but I didn't stop. None of us did. It was pure adrenaline. We were maybe halfway down the hill stumbling through the trees and trying to stick together when we saw flashlights bobbing toward us. It was Joe, Thomas, and the counselor who had run in after them. They were laughing. Not just laughing, they were bent over, hands on knees, out of breath from how hard they were laughing. That's when it hit us. They'd made the whole thing up. Turns out, Joe and Thomas had decided to play into the whole townie thing as a prank. They didn't tell the third counselor. That bang and scream? Joe had kicked a log or something and screamed as loud as he could. Then he ran back, told us to flee, and turned around to rescue Thomas. The plan was just to scare us a bit, not cause full-blown hysteria. But since they didn't tell the other counselor, he'd believed it. And because we trusted him, we believed it. It spiraled way out of control. No one said much right then. Some kids were furious. Others were just too exhausted and shaken up to even react. We all sat down right there on the trail and tried to catch our breath. My legs were covered in scratches, and one guy had twisted his ankle pretty bad. Took us a while to hike back up and collect our stuff in the dark. We didn't even finish the overnight. The counselors ended up walking us all the way back to the main camp in the middle of the night. The next morning, the camp director was waiting for us. Joe and Thomas got reamed out. Word spread fast, and pretty soon every kid at camp was talking about what happened. After that, the camp made a new rule. Counselors were no longer allowed to scare campers. No pranks, no fake stories, nothing. They said it was for safety reasons, but everyone knew it was because of us. Looking back on it now, I can laugh. A little. But in that moment, that night, it was the most terrified I've ever been in my life. No movie or ghost story ever came close. And even though we were never really in danger, that fear was real. The panic was real. That night is still burned into my brain, every second of it. And I think if you asked any of the other guys who were there, they'd say the same. I worked at a summer camp in North Georgia for a few years back in the early 2000s. We took kids on overnight hikes and did long sections of the Appalachian Trail near Dahlonega. That area, if you don't know, is right near the beginning of the trail, and it also happens to be a place where the Army Rangers train. You'd sometimes see signs posted on trees warning about military exercises or low-flying helicopters, but it was never a big deal. The camp had a system and we followed it. Still, there was always this quiet understanding among the counselors that you stayed alert when hiking out there. It wasn't superstition, it was just common sense. This particular story happened about 15 years ago. I was in my early 20s, and it was my second summer at the camp. We were leading a small group of kids, middle schoolers, on a 3-night backpacking trip. It was hot, early July. Real muggy days and cooler nights. That week we were out near Blood Mountain, though a few miles off the usual trail traffic. The counselors had picked a lesser-known site not far from a fire road. It was flat, quiet, and had a stream nearby. We liked it because it was easier to spread out, and the kids could feel like they were really in the wild. There were 3 counselors on that trip. Me, a guy named Evan, and a girl named Kayla. She was a junior in college at the time, tall, blonde, outdoorsy. She was good with the kids and didn't scare easy. We took turns doing gear checks, boiling water, running the meals. The kids were in their tents by 9 p.m., and by 10, the 3 of us had rolled out our sleeping bags on a tarp maybe 20 yards from them. We cowboy camped, just laying on top of the tarp under the stars. Something we did often. Less of a hassle than tents, and the air was cooler on your face. We never had issues before. That night was clear and quiet. You could hear some frogs and insects, but it wasn't too loud. I remember I fell asleep fast like I always did out there. I was tired from hiking and loading packs all day. We all were. I woke up just after sunrise. The light through the trees was soft and gold, the kind that makes you blink a few times and feel disoriented. I sat up and stretched. Evan was already up, sitting on a rock tying his boots. The kids were still quiet in their tents. Then I heard Kayla say, real calm but weird, "Hey, what the hell is this?" She was lying on her side, facing away from us, still half in her sleeping bag. I walked over to where she was and saw it immediately, right next to her head, maybe 6 inches from her face. A long black combat knife was stabbed into the dirt, the kind with the serrated edge. Clean, shiny. Tied around the handle with a strip of paracord was a folded piece of paper. She didn't touch it. Neither did I. Evan walked over and crouched down, looked at it, then gently pulled the paper off. He opened it and read it. His face didn't change, but I could see the color drain out of his neck. He passed it to me, said, in simple handwriting, no smudges or tears. We could have killed you last night. Zoxo, the Army Rangers. That's it. I still remember how quiet the forest felt right then. Not peaceful, but heavy, like all the air got sucked out of the woods. Kayla was just staring at the knife. Evan stood up and started looking around slowly, scanning the trees. I did the same, but there was nothing to see. Just trunks and light, like any other morning. We didn't say much. We all knew that someone had come into our camp, got close enough to lean over and stab a knife into the dirt right next to Kayla's face, and none of us had stirred. They didn't take anything. They didn't mess with the kids. Just that knife and that note. Kayla finally stood up. Her face was pale, her hands shaking a little. She kept rubbing her neck like someone had touched her. We started packing up right away, quietly but quickly. The kids were still asleep, which helped. We didn't want to scare them. We didn't even discuss staying another night. It wasn't a question. We got them up, had them eat some bars for breakfast, and said we were heading back a day early due to incoming weather. It was a lie, but believable. They were disappointed, but we kept things moving. As we hiked out, we kept glancing over our shoulders. Every now and then I swore I heard something move just out of sight, but it could have been squirrels or our own paranoia. Still, I never felt easy. The whole hike out, I felt watched. We made it back to the van by mid-afternoon. Kayla sat up front with me and didn't say a word the whole ride back. Evan sat with the kids and kept them laughing and singing camp songs, which honestly helped keep things normal. When we got back to the main camp, we pulled the camp director aside. We didn't make a scene. We just told him exactly what happened. First, he looked like he didn't believe us. Then we showed him the note. He read it twice and set it down real slow. He said he was going to report it to the Forest Service and contact some military liaison office. Said it might have been some off-duty guys messing around, but it wasn't acceptable. He told us not to talk about it to the other counselors or kids, not because he was trying to hide it, but because he didn't want rumors spreading or people panicking. Nothing ever came of the report as far as I know. We never got a follow-up. No one ever owned up to it. But the director quietly pulled all our future overnight trips away from that part of the trail. We started going more southward after that, closer to Amikalola Falls and some of the better patrolled spots. That was the last year Kayla worked there. She finished the season but didn't come back. I didn't blame her. For me, I kept going back a couple more summers, but I never cowboy camped again. Not once. I always pitched a tent and zipped it shut, even in perfect weather. Sometimes I think about that night, not in a spooky way, but in a cold, practical way. Someone trained, someone who knew how to move without being heard, came into our camp. They could have done anything they wanted. They didn't, but they wanted us to know they could have. That note wasn't a joke. It wasn't some kid playing soldier. It was a message, a very direct one. We were in their training ground and they let us know. When I think back to that trip, the first thing I remember is the sound of small rocks skipping over the surface of the lake. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, still at that age where I looked up to my dad like he could do anything, like nothing bad could happen as long as I was holding his hand. We were in Yellowstone, just the two of us on a summer camping trip, staying a few nights in a tent near the lake. It was one of those days that felt like a picture on a postcard. Blue sky, warm sunlight, the wind light enough to rustle the pine needles above us, but not cold enough to need a jacket. I was wearing one of those old plastic sun visors, bright red and slightly too big, and my dad had helped me dig a little pouch on my belt loop to collect cool rocks. We had been walking near the lake, tossing stones, just laughing and talking about which one skipped best, which one made the biggest splash. We weren't on a trail, just weaving our way between trees and tall dry grass along the edge of the water. It was so quiet except for the occasional chirp of a bird or the splash of a stone hitting the water. It was late afternoon, and the sun was starting to drop lower behind the hills. Shadows were stretching longer across the water. My dad checked his watch. He always wore a big one with a thick black strap, and I remember the way the sun hit the scratched-up glass. He said we should start heading back soon so we could cook before it got too dark. That was when we saw him. There was a man sitting maybe 50 or 60 feet away, leaned up against a tree. He was slumped, like someone who had been hiking and just took a break. His head was tilted down a little, chin resting almost on his chest, arms resting in his lap. He had a wide-brimmed hat pulled down low, some kind of old canvas jacket on, and boots that were caked in dry mud. From a distance, nothing looked strange. We even joked a little. My dad said something like, he picked a good spot for a nap, but the light was fading, and my dad wasn't the type to leave things to chance. He figured the guy had maybe gotten too tired, or had a little too much to drink, or just didn't know how cold it got at night up there. My dad didn't want someone freezing out in the woods, so we started walking over. I followed behind him, still holding a few small rocks in my hand. First, it was just quiet, but when we got within 20 feet or so, we noticed the smell. It hit me first. I stopped walking. It wasn't the kind of smell you expect in the woods. It wasn't the smell of dead animals or rot. It was just awful, thick, like someone had filled the air with garbage and sewage. It made my nose sting. It made the back of my throat burn. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't like it. My dad must have smelled it too because he suddenly stopped and told me to stay put. I did more than willingly. He walked ahead a few more feet, cautiously now. I remember him standing there for a second, maybe hoping the guy would move or say something. Then he called out, not loud, just firm. He always had a calm voice, even when he was serious. No response. He said it again, louder. Nothing. I stood still and watched as my dad got closer, stepped around to the guy's side, and gently tapped him on the shoulder. That's when the man moved. It wasn't like he woke up or anything. He just shifted. More like he collapsed slightly, like something had given way. His body made this awful crunching sound, quiet but sharp, like twigs breaking under weight. His hat slipped off and fell to the side. My dad didn't say anything, but I could see the change in his face from where I was standing. The air felt heavier, colder. The guy's face was the worst part. Because of how he'd been sitting, all the blood had drained to one side of his head. One half was pale, grayish-white. The other was a deep, dark purple, like it had been dipped in ink. One of his eyes was blood red. Not just the white of it, but the whole thing. Popped, swollen, like something had broken inside. His mouth hung slightly open, and his lips looked dry and cracked. His body looked stiff, almost frozen in place except for where it had shifted. My dad turned around quickly and walked over to me. He didn't say anything for a second, just looked down at me with a serious face and told me we were going to the ranger station. He didn't take my hand, just kept me walking fast in front of him. Not running, but steady and fast. I think I was too young to fully process what I had seen. I just knew something was wrong. I didn't talk the whole way back. The ranger station wasn't too far, maybe a 10 or 15-minute walk. It was a small wooden building near the edge of the camping area. My dad told the first person we saw that we needed help, that someone was dead out by the lake. I remember a woman coming out from behind the counter and crouching down to talk to me. I didn't feel like talking. She had this massive puff of yellow curly hair, and I thought she looked like Big Bird. That stuck with me. She gave me some water and let me sit on a bench inside the station while my dad left with a ranger and a paramedic who had been nearby. They had a small off-road vehicle, and I remember hearing it start up and drive off. I just sat there for a long time. The woman gave me some kind of hard candy and tried to keep me distracted. I don't remember if I cried or not. I just remember my legs swinging off the bench and my fingers sticky from the candy. It was dark by the time my dad came back. He looked tired, like someone had pressed a heavy weight down on his shoulders. He didn't say much, just rubbed my head and told me everything was fine, and that I had done a good job listening. Later that night, back at our tent, he told me the man had been out there a while, that he might have been alone or gotten sick, Or maybe even just wandered off trail and couldn't find his way back. He didn't go into details. I don't know if he ever found out the full story, but I do know he sat up most of the night outside the tent, in one of those collapsible chairs, holding a flashlight in his lap. He didn't go to sleep until the sky started to get light again. We cut the trip short and drove home the next morning. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. Not in school, not to friends. It wasn't a story that felt like it belonged anywhere. It wasn't dramatic or exciting. It was just real. And it stuck with me in that strange way childhood memories do, half vivid and half blurred. Sometimes I wonder what happened to that man, if someone missed him, if he had family looking for him, or if he just slipped away quietly one afternoon in the woods, not far from where a father and his kid were skipping stones and laughing, completely unaware. That trip was supposed to be just another fun adventure with my dad, and it was for the most part. But ever since then, I've never walked through a quiet patch of woods without looking twice at every shape, every still figure in the distance, because sometimes they don't move, and sometimes they've been sitting there longer than you want to believe.